Hello everybody, my name is Judge April. You might remember me from a couple weeks ago when I was on Magic the Hammertrain talking about the Magic Online Vintage Cube. Well, I had so much fun doing that recording that I have since broken into Maria's house and have set up all of this recording equipment to directly transmit more advice on Cube. So while I'm all set up here with all of her sweet gear, let's talk about the top 10 best cards in the entire Magic Online Vintage Cube. Now, first of all, what is the Magic Online Vintage Cube? It is a set of cards, usually a singleton format. So in this case, there's 540 unique cards from all across Magic. And the Vintage Cube is special because amongst these 540 cards are some of the best, most powerful, most broken cards ever created in all of Magic's history. So you take all these 540 cards, all unique, all busted, all incredible to draft, and you draft them just like a normal draft, but instead of opening 2 2s for 2, you're opening up cards like Soul Ring and Balance and Ancestral Recall. These cards are so strong that you would never see them in a normal pack of Magic cards because they would just dominate a normal draft. But in a Vintage Cube, opening up these cards is all part of the fun. So number 10, the 10th most powerful card in all of Cube is Mana Drain. Now, Mana Drain is a counter spell. It's a hard counter, just like the traditional counter spell, and it costs the same cost as the traditional counter spell. It costs 2 blue, and it counters a spell, but more importantly, it gives you back every mana that your opponent put into casting that spell. So if they spent 4 mana to cast a spell and you Mana Drain it, on your next turn, you get 4 free colorless mana. If they cast it for 6, you get 6 mana, and so on. And this is great for control decks. It's probably the best card in the cube for a control deck because what it allows you to do is it allows you to stop their best card and then it lets you cast your best card or one of your best cards for essentially for free because you've gotten all this free mana, and then you get to continue to hold up extra mana for counter spells and removal on your turn. Because of that, Mana Drain is number 10. Coming in at number 9 is a card that's almost hard to believe exists on a land. It's so bizarre. You can't believe that they chose to make this card, and it's oh no, it's not bizarre. It's Library of Alexandria. Library of Alexandria taps for a normal colorless mana like most utility lands, but for some reason it says underneath that, tap to draw a card. Draw a card for tapping a single land. That's all you have to do and you get a free card. The only downside is that you have to have 7 cards in your hand, which makes this card extremely busted in your opening hand. You know, if you start a game with Library of Alexandria, on turn 1 you play Library, and then you just wait. Your turn comes around, you draw an extra card, play a land, maybe you play like a Signet or something, then you just get to draw a card again and again and again and again. So by turn 5, you've drawn 5 more cards than your opponent, and it's very hard to lose the game from that position when you're just outdrawing your opponent so well. So for that reason, Library of Alexandria comes in at number 9, and it's not higher because it only works if you have 7 cards in your hand, making it not quite as good on turn 10 when you draw it. Coming in at number 8 is Medivolt. Medivolt is, kind of a card that I think a lot people don't expect to see on a top 10 list. It's a card that only costs a few dollars in the real world. But what it does is it just gives you 3 colorless mana for free, one-time use, essentially. You can untap it for 4 mana, but really you play this card because you get to have 3 colorless mana all at once. So you play it for 1 on turn 1, and then on turn 2, you've got 2 land in play and a Medivolt. So on turn 2, you get to cast a 5-drop. If you cast a powerful enough 5-drop, it's really hard for other decks to come back. Or on, turn 3, you cast a 6-drop. You cast a Warm Coil Engine on turn 3. And it's very hard for a lot of decks to beat that. It's not higher on the list because you only get to use it once, but nevertheless, getting free mana before you're supposed to get it is extremely powerful, and this is one of the more busted ways of doing that. And this is a theme you're gonna hear over and over on this list, especially on number 7 here. We're gonna talk about Mox Pearl and Mox Emerald. Now, I think a lot of people, when they think the most powerful cards in Magic, think the Moxes, right? But these Moxes, I think, are not quite as good as the others. And for that reason, I both grouped them together because nobody wants a top 10 list that is Mox, 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 Mox. That's just not very fun. So Mox Emerald and and Mox Pearl come in at number 7. Green and white, just not that good of colors in the Vintage Cube compared to some of the other colors. White is better than green, I think, but they're still great. Even if they just said, you know, cost 0 mana and you could tap them for a single colorless mana, they would be great. And for a lot of decks, that's all they are. And just that alone makes them strong enough to be number 7 on the list. Coming in number 6 is a card that actually does tap for colorless mana, and that is Mana Crypt. Mana Crypt is in some ways more powerful than another card you're gonna hear on this list because it costs only 0 mana to cast. It costs 0 mana to cast, and right away, you get 2 free colorless mana. So on turn 1, you have access to 3 mana. 3 mana on turn 1. You know, you could cast, and I've done this myself, Mana Crypt, tap it for 2, cast a Signet, play a land, tap that Signet, cast another Signet. And all of a sudden, you know, on turn 2, you've got, I think, 6 mana. It's so hard for other decks to beat that when you're just way ahead of them. But the reason why it's not higher on the list is that it comes with a pretty serious drawback. And that is that every single turn on your upkeep, you have to flip a coin. And you have to choose heads or tails. Now, if you get it right, nothing happens. Life just goes on, and you're happy with your 2 free mana. But if you guess wrong, you take 3 damage right to the face. And that damage can add up very quickly. If you have a Mana Crypt in play and you're not killing your opponent right away, that might add up to 6 damage, 9 damage, 12 damage over the course of the game. And against some decks, such as like the mono red deck, the white aggro deck, some of these decks just do early damage to you and you'll be killed by your own Mana Crypt. That sounds bad enough, but even worse on Magic Online, you have to choose every single turn whether you want heads or you want tails on the coin flip. There's no option in Magic Online to say, Magic Online, tails never fails, always choose tails. You have to always choose heads or tails. And that incessant clicking, turn after turn after turn, keeps Mana Crypt at number 6. Coming in at number 5 is Time Walk, another blue card. It's 1 in a blue, and it says, take an extra turn. With Magic Online's Vintage Cube, taking an extra turn for 2 mana is extremely busted because you are doing a lot of broken things for very cheap. You might be putting a Grizzlebrand into play for 2 mana or 3 mana. And when you're doing that, you will often still have 1 or 2 or 3 mana left. So if you can put a Grizzlebrand in play and follow it up immediately with an extra turn, you're just going to win the game. You get to draw 7 cards, you get to get an attack for 7, you get to gain 7 life. There's a lot of cards like this where you cast a card and then immediately, because it's so cheap, you take an extra turn that it's well worth taking very early. Now sometimes it's not busted. Sometimes you just cast it on turn 2 and you just get to, it just gets you a replacement card and an extra land drop just like Explorer. But later on in the game, when you're trying to close out a game, getting a free extra, essentially a free or a very low cost extra turn is enough to make it number 5. Not to mention, you know, you can do Time Walk, Snapcaster, Time Walk, and take 2 extra turns, still for very cheap. So coming in at number 4, of course, is more broken mana. We have the rest of the Moxes. Mox Sapphire, Mox Ruby, and Mox Jet. I think their order of power is that exact order. So Mox Sapphire is the best Mox because blue is the best coloring cube. Mox Ruby is number 2, the number 2 best Mox because I think red is the 2nd best coloring cube, and I think black is the 3rd best coloring cube, making Mox Jet the 3rd best Mox. Just like all the other Moxes, you get a free mana every turn by these color fix for you if you're in those colors. They just replace the land in your deck. So you can just have Mox Sapphire play an island, you've got Mana Drain open on turn, or Counterspell open on turn 1. You play Mox Jet, you play a land, you cast Demonic Tutor on turn 1. You get to have a lot of these really busted starts, but in colors you actually want to be playing in cube. So, number 4, Mox Sapphire, Mox Ruby, Mox Jet. Coming in at number 3 is a card I think is going to surprise a lot of people, and that is Black Lotus. A lot of people are thinking, April, how is Black Lotus not the best card in all of the Vintage Cube? It costs like $25 million to buy one, right? Something like that. How can it not be the best card in all of Magic? It's certainly the most iconic card in all of Magic. And it's very, very, very good. You just play a Black Lotus on turn 0, and you get three mana of any color that you can add to your mana pool. So you can go turn 1 Island, Black Lotus, Jace the Mind Sculptor, or any number of really, really busted starts that your opponents just cannot win. When you get a 4-drop on turn 1, or a 5-drop on turn 2, sometimes even a 6-drop on turn 3, not quite as powerful because there's lots of ways to get 6-drops on turn 3, but nevertheless, having these super, 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 super fast starts. And sometimes you can just win the game with Black Lotus on turn 1. The other day I did turn 1 land, Soul Ring, Black Lotus, tinkered it away. And right away I had a Mere Battlesphere on turn 1 and my opponent just scooped. Black Lotus will get you a lot of turn 1 scoops, more than any other card. People will just be like, I can't win this game, and the game's over. So for that reason, Black Lotus is number 3, but it's not higher on the list simply because you just get the mana one time, and that one-time burst of mana is just not that good when you draw it later in the game. If it's turn 5 or turn 6 and you don't need the mana that much anymore, drawing a Black Lotus is a little bit miserable. Now, a lot of the cards that we've heard on this list, Library of Alexandria, the Moxes, Mana Crypto, they're also not that great. But the fact that, even drawing Black Lotus on turn 3 or on turn 4, it's just not as strong as it could be compared to some of the other cards on the list. So, coming in at number 2 is, I think, my favorite card on this list, and that is Ancestral Recall. Now, I think we can all agree that the best thing in all of Magic is playing more Magic, right? So if you get to draw more cards, you get to play more Magic, and for that reason, Ancestral Recall is number 2. For 1 blue mana, at instant speed, you get to draw 3 cards. If you're playing it right and you're not just be like, I'm on the play, turn 1 Island, Ancestral Recall, and have to discard a card, if you play it right, you're just gonna be so far ahead of your opponents and so far ahead of them on cards that it can be hard for them to catch up. If you're playing a combo deck, drawing 3 cards pulls your combo pieces together. If you're playing a blue-red aggressive tempo deck, drawing 3 cards might get you a burn spell and another couple creatures. Whatever you're doing, drawing 3 cards is gonna get you more busted cards. All of the cards in the Vintage Cube are busted, and when you get to draw 3 more for essentially nothing, you're gonna win some games with it. So coming in at number 2, Ancestral Recall. And at number 1, the number 1 most powerful card, I think, in the entire Vintage Cube, it's Soul Ring. If you open up a pack of cards in the Vintage Cube and you look at those 15 cards and you say, there's a Soul Ring, but I just don't know if it's the right fit for my deck, you're probably wrong. There's almost no deck that Soul Ring is not the best card in that entire deck, no matter what that deck is doing. I think the only exception for this might be if you're playing mono red. If you're playing a mono red aggressive deck, maybe Mox Ruby is a little bit better. But nevertheless, if you open up a Soul Ring, you just click it and you take it and you're just gonna win some games. If you cast Soul Ring on turn 1, it's gonna win you some games. Even casting it on turn 3 or turn 4 is not that bad because you get 2 mana that turn, you get 2 mana the next turn, 2 mana the next turn, and that adds up over time to overwhelm your opponent just from the mana advantage alone. So Soul Ring, I think, is the number 1 card in Cube. It goes in every deck. On turn 1, it's gonna win you a huge percentage of your games. You can't go wrong with Soul Ring. And so with this, thank you all for listening. That was the 10 most powerful cards in all of Vintage Cube. Now I've got to get out of here before Maria gets back and sees me filming it on the sign equipment. So I'll catch you all next time. Have a great one. Bye.